Oysters are part of our culture in Louisiana, but how we harvest them is changing.
A man at the center of the state's aquaculture movement is putting a new spin on the age-old tradition. Lily Cummings introduces us to Oyster Daddy.
In Grand Isle, a new way to harvest oysters is growing.
It takes a lot of care, it takes a lot of patience.
After years in the hospitality industry, Ryan Anderson quit his job to do this full time.
There's a lot of scary times, there's a lot of rewarding times, but I think that as long as you're passionate and driven about something, you can usually find a way to make it work.
Now he's better known as Oyster Daddy.
And my friend was like, "You're raising the oysters, you're the Oyster's daddy." And I was like, yeah, essentially, that's what I am, so that name kind of stuck. I grew up in southern Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay, and I grew up crabbing and oystering up there. That taught me about working with the land, really having a lot of respect for the waterways.
Oyster Daddy took us on his boat to see his farm in the bay. He calls it Little Moon Oyster Ranch.
In Grand Isle, we're still building up to the production level of somewhere like Florida for aquaculture oysters. Gosh, there's like 8 of us now, and it's really been in the past 4 years that this has become a little more popular, this growing style.
Instead of reproducing in the wild, Anderson buys oyster seeds from hatcheries across the Gulf Coast.
So this is some seed I put in the water last week, and these are all about between 9 and 12 millimeters, and then these are about 2 months old, 2 or 3 months old.
He raises them in these floating cages.
3 to 4 fingers is usually what I go for.
Until they're ready to leave the nest. Then he sells them to restaurants or shucks them himself.
In New Orleans, we have kind of this issue that I was running into a couple years ago where oysters are increasingly more and more expensive. So I started Oyster Daddy as a sort of like pop-up and catering business to offer oysters that I was growing at a cheaper rate.
Anderson says the concept of oyster aquaculture started about 20 years ago. The difference boils down to genetics and how they grow.
It is a little bit more sustainable and a little bit easier to manage than doing the wild harvest oysters.
Instead of dredging a reef, they develop here. Anderson says most don't spawn. That and refrigeration requirements means they're less likely to make you sick.
Kind of doing away with that myth that you can't eat oysters in the summertime.
Anderson says traditional oysters are beneficial for fortifying our marshes, but these oysters also clean the water.
Cool thing for both the environment and for both sustainable meat production and food production in the U.S.
Plus, oyster farms take less capital to get started.
It just requires a lot less. I run a smaller boat, I don't use as much gasoline. Again, it's just me operating, so it's a lot less input than the more traditional ways of commercial fishing.
Centuries ago, oystermen weren't using Instagram either.
Back in the day when people here was tonging oysters out of the bay.
Thousands of people follow Oyster Daddy for history and humor.
Welcome to Little Moon Oysters ASMR.
While he likes to keep it lighthearted, his mission is serious.
Grow food for the community that I live in and provide this really delicious and wonderful thing that used to be super plentiful and now is more of a luxury product.
Keeping a Louisiana tradition accessible, one oyster at a time. In Grand Isle, Lily Cummings, WWL Louisiana.
I can go for some oysters myself. If you want to try them for yourself, you can place orders or catering requests through the Oyster Daddy Instagram. We have it linked on our website, WWLTV.com.